I'd like to welcome you all to In Conservation With, which has been now running for, well, since the beginning of the first lockdown, certainly in Spain anyway. So it's been a bit of a lockdown sort of favourite over the last few months. Today, I'm speaking to Keith Betton. My name is David Lindo, also known as the Urban Birder, and I must mention our sponsors, Leica Sport Optics, and also King's Place Music Foundation, and this is part of their Nature Unwrapped season, which actually ends in this month. Actually, ends on the 21st, I believe, when we have the national treasure and icon and a fabulous actor, Alison Steadman, here to talk about her love for birds and fungi, which I never knew about actually. Anyway, enough about that. Let me talk about this guy we have in front of us by the name of Keith Betton. I've known Keith for some time, but for those who haven't come across him or don't know him well, let me quickly give you kind of a potted history, which I'm sure you'll embellish for me, Keith. Firstly, the most interesting thing, well, one of the most interesting things about Keith, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that he's a keen world birder. And whenever I look on the Facebook page that he has, and if it's not obviously during pandemic, then he's in some far-flung place on the planet somewhere. You've seen over 8,500 species of bird. You literally got, what, 2,000 to go?
Yep.
In over 100 countries. Before we even go any further, why?
Why? Well, I did my first big birding trip when I was 23. I went to Kenya. I think I saw about 250 species of birds. I thought that was fantastic. I came back, somebody said to me, 250, you should have seen at least 700. And I realized that there was a lot more out there than I was seeing. So I did a few more trips, but then I got really lucky. When I was 26, I was offered a job to work in the travel industry. And the job was to act as spokesman for the travel industry in the UK. So all the travel companies, and to some extent the airlines, relied on me to speak on their behalf on television and radio whenever anything was happening in the world that maybe was a tricky subject. And as part of that job, I traveled around the world. I went to many countries. I would go, in any 6 months, I'd go to at least 4 continents on business. And I always took my binoculars. And I frequently arranged the visits to finish on say a Wednesday evening in Australia, let's say, where I would then be expected to fly home that evening, have a couple of days off, then the weekend, and then be back at work on the Monday. And instead of that, I would actually go straight from wherever the meeting was to somewhere else to go birding in Australia and have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday birding. I'd get the Sunday night flight home. I'd have a change of clothes at the office and nobody knew. So bit by bit, I worked up a big list and somebody was paying for it. So it was nice to do that. And now I pay for myself.
Fantastic. It's good to get started on someone else's coin. Very good. You've been a council member of both the RSPB and the British Trust for Ornithology, and you're currently the Vice President of the LATA, the BTO. You live locally where you live, you are also the chairman of the Hampshire Ornithological Society, and I love watching looking at your Facebook stuff for the peregrines.
Yep.
In your area. So maybe we'll talk about that briefly at some point.
Sure.
You are a mentor for A Focus on Nature, which is a group, I suppose, an organization helping young people to plan their career paths in conservation and wildlife. And you are the founding trustees of the Cameron Bespoker Trust, which creates opportunities for young people to engage with nature. And you work closely with the Trust's young ambassadors, of which Maya is one.
Absolutely.
And you give them media training advice to several who create blogs and occasionally appear on TV. And plus you give media training to other NGOs as well.
I do.
So you've been working in public relations, since the devil was a boy. You've been on TV about 6 million times. I met you, I've known you, where did I meet you actually? But we've always struck a chord together, haven't we?
I first knew you when you worked for the BTO. And I also knew you when you worked for Birdwatch. So yeah, I've probably known you 20 years.
I worked for Birdwatch in the beginning of 1990, so that's about 30 years now, isn't it?
Well, we were both quite young, so I've forgotten, so long ago, I've forgotten how old I was or where we were, but it's about, yeah, getting on for 40 years then, David.
No, not bad for 42. Um,
Yeah. Mm.
so yeah, so basically I've known him for a long time. We've always struck a chord. What I like about Keith is his honesty. He's very, it calls it as he sees it, which I like in a person. So we've always got on well in that respect. But I really wanted to get Keith on today to talk about this subject of public speaking, of actually getting out there and talking in front of an audience, because I feel personally that that's a subject which is often overlooked, which is often or not even actually addressed in terms of giving any training. And I'll give you a very sort of big example. When we had Gillian Burke on, and I'm not saying that she's not a good presenter, of course she is, but she said when we were talking that she was struggling when she first started doing Springwatch. And I remember watching Springwatch, and I remember seeing people slating her for her performances. And I was thinking, someone needs to talk, and help her, as they would help anyone. And when I asked her the question on the night, she actually said, but no one did. She was basically made to sort of do it herself. And I just can't believe that, because I think for me, public speaking is such an important element of anyone's job if you are in front of the public.
I totally agree, David. And, the thing is, if you go out and do it and you do it badly, you remember it for the rest of your life. And for many people, they do it only once. They hate it because they're not very good at it, and they never get over that. And so they never do it again. For me, and I think also you, when I go on TV or live in front of an audience of, in my case, sometimes up to 2,000 people, I actually get excited. I don't get nervous. I turn the feeling of nervousness into excitement, which is something that makes me perform better as a result. And I always also think that, particularly with younger people who are doing their first opportunity to speak in public, they sometimes don't prepare enough. You can never over prepare for something. I've been preparing this all day, this conversation with you, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be right. And if you actually prepare for it and you do it well, the nervousness won't be necessary. Only be nervous if you're doing something which you're not prepared to do. So if I had to talk about nuclear physics, I'd be nervous as hell. But I'm talking about birds. I'm talking in public. So,
No, it's interesting because you talk about not being prepared. I remember when I've been doing the urban birder thing now for 14 years. And prior to that, I used to work in sales and marketing. So I was used to presenting to small groups information, selling stuff to them basically. And I was used to that. So that was fine. And I also kind of taught myself. And plus I did have some kind of sales training as well when I touched on that. But when I became the urban birder, I remember the first couple of talks I gave were local talks about Wormwood Scrubs, my local patch. And I remember on the first occasion, no one turned up. On the second occasion, one person turned up, and he was my mate. And anyway, things moved on, and I had one of my first big gigs. I spoke at the Lee Valley Wildlife Weekend in East London. I spoke to an audience of maybe 100 people. And prior to talking, I thought to myself, I'll just go on stage and just talk. It's fine, no problem. I didn't even think about it. And I remember speaking to Steve Batchel, who was on before me, and I got up on stage and I just suddenly thought, oh, I'm actually in front of these people. So I started speaking, and I had 40 minutes to speak, and my speech was effectively finished in 20 minutes.
Yep.
And I then had to bumble for the following 20 minutes. I felt awful. And even though people said to me, oh yeah, you did well, it's great, thank you very much, I thought that was the worst in my life, and I'll never do that again. And I use that as a benchmark from now on.
Well, one of my most important sayings is, if you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And that's an example of it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
One of the most exciting things I ever had to do was I used to do a lot on GMTV, which used to be on in the mornings, breakfast time. And it was when one of the terror attacks was happening around the airports. And I was there with John Stapleton, the very well-known presenter of GMTV. And we weren't supposed to be going live for at least 25 minutes. And John had gone to the loo. But a news item dropped, something they were going to have, a package they had already prepared, disappeared, tape snarled up, goodness knows what. And they said, right, we're coming live. Where's John? And I said, well, John's just gone to the loo. And they said, well, we're going to go to live with you. And with that, I lost all the sound as well. So I couldn't hear them. I was listening through an earpiece. So instead of John interviewing me, I was now speaking direct to Penny Smith in the studio. The other thing that happened is that, just as I say, I got a horrible scrambling noise in my earpiece because something went wrong with it. And the sound engineer could hear the studio through his phone, but that's the only thing. And so he just had to go like this at the point where I had to speak. And I just had to guess what Penny Smith had asked me, and I couldn't hear her. I knew she could hear me. And this is where it gets exciting. I didn't get nervous. I thought, this is fantastic. I've always wanted to present live TV, and I'm doing this in front of, I don't know, 2 or 3 million people. So I just said, well, Penny, welcome to Heathrow Airport, where today thousands of people are traveling on holiday, but their baggage is being screened, they're being delayed. And if you're coming to the airport today, you must make sure you prepare for that. Otherwise, you're going to miss your flight. More details later in the program, back to you in the studio. And she had no idea that I couldn't hear her question or anything, you know, and yeah, I must admit, I felt nervous afterwards, but at the time I felt excited. So that's the thing, you know, I think, don't feel nervous, feel excited, try it, and you'll probably be a lot better than you think. And the thing to always remember about this is that people watching, like today, everybody watching today, they want this to be good. They don't want me to fail and be a mess. People in the audience want you to be a success.
That's true. I think that's what I've always had in my head. But anyway, let's learn more about what you have to tell us effectively.
Okay, so let's see if we can get this bit right. I'm going to share my screen, and let's just tell me when you see it as a slide with a microphone.
It worked well in rehearsals.
You see, we prepared. Are you seeing that now?
Yep, got the microphone.
Brilliant. Okay, well, here we go. I'm not going to talk for too long, 20 minutes or so. And I have actually, to some extent, pitched this as a slightly younger audience than average, but that's just because those are usually the people who've never had the chance to speak in public until now. So, yeah, communicating for conservation. If we, let me just see if I can get my slide to move. There we go. That's me. So I am a conservationist, as you've described, David. I'm involved in many different things. But also I've had a career in front of the media for 20 years as the UK spokesman for the travel industry, TV, radio, live performances. And after leaving my job, I actually became a media consultant advising senior staff at some of the biggest names in the country on how to perform better. Now I do it for free because I do it for conservation organizations because I want them to win. That's my Twitter address in case any of you want to connect with me at any point. And if we go back a long, long time, back in the time when flares were in fact fashionable, here I am on Blue Peter in 1977. So David, you were probably watching that. You'd have been, I think, if I've got this right, either 13 or 14 at that point. Here I am. I was just 16 years old there. And I appeared on Blue Peter. I talked about birds. And it was the first TV appearance I ever made. Still got it somewhere on a videotape. I better copy it before it dies. So there I am with John Noakes and Shep, and that was a great experience. It went out on national TV, and I've never looked back really. I went and did quite a lot of radio after that as well. So what are the opportunities if you're somebody who wants to have a bit of a profile, speaking about a project, whatever it may be? Clearly, there's public speaking, so I'll mainly talk about that tonight. But there's also the chance to go on TV and radio. There are online forums and so on, and there are also opportunities to write. Now, public speaking is the first one to really talk about, because for most people, that is the thing they're going to have the chance to do. There are RSPB groups up and down the country. There are bird clubs up and down the country. And of course, there are, opportunities like this tonight, speaking on part of a live Zoom talk. So public speaking is probably where you're going to get your big break. In fact, I got my first big break to speak in public when I was 15. The RSPB asked me to give a talk, but they didn't know I was 15. And it was a few years later they realized I was actually at school studying for my A-levels. I think they thought I was in my 30s. But anyway, before you are, when you're asked to speak, here's what you need to do. First of all, why you? And I put this back to your point, David, about when you spoke at that Lee Valley event. Why have they asked you to speak? Do you know enough to do a good enough job? Would you prefer a different topic? So let's say they'd ask you to speak about something very precise to do with urban birds. Might not be quite what you wanted, like a wider subject. So feel free to try and get them to, alter the topic so it suits you perfectly. Have you been given too much time to speak, as indeed you had, David? You had twice as long as you really wanted. But, sometimes you get too little time. And actually a really important question is, do you actually have time to do this? Because if you don't have time to prepare for it, you're going to do a lousy job. You're going to regret it forever. And people will go around saying, I heard that guy giving a talk and it was useless. So that's important when you're first being asked to speak. I regularly talk about these three things: control, confidence, and clarity. And here they are succinctly described. So you need to decide what your messages are. It depends on what you're talking about, but if you've got a very short time when you're going to speak, maybe just for 10 minutes, have 3 points, 3 really strong points. So have control over your message. Speak with confidence, speak up, inspire trust, and clarity, which is very different from confidence. Confidence is being, you are owning the stage. Clarity is using simple words. If you use long words that people don't know or they can't hear properly, you're going to lose them. So speak clearly and be understood. So here we have control. Have control of what's going to happen. Decide your messages, and as I say, if it's a short thing, 3 strong points. If it's a longer talk for maybe, I don't know, as long as I'm going to be talking today, up to half an hour or so, have about 10 points. And I would say have bullet point notes with your keywords highlighted. Now, a lot of people, they write down what they're going to say in detail. And that really works for them because it gets them the time to get all the messages in the right order. So you could do that, but don't use that on the day. What you need to do is have bullet points on cards, and I only highlight one word in each sentence because otherwise your eye will wander. Just want that one word being the word that's going to help you to get it right. So avoid reading from a script. Always a good idea to have the script nearby just in case you do get lost, but yeah, you don't read from a script. Otherwise, it'll be awful. Confidence, speaking with confidence, speaking to the back of the room. Look at the very back row and speak to them. And that's how you do inspire trust, by speaking up. And I think when you're talking, we've all been in the situation where you're looking at the audience and you can see at least 3 people checking their phones. Back in the day when I gave these talks, first of all, nobody had even heard of a mobile phone. But people now, they're looking at their phone, they're writing something. They're not actually looking at you, they're not listening. And therefore, find somebody who is listening to you and concentrate on them. Give the talk to them because they're the ones engaging with you, and that will actually improve your performance. Yeah, and as I say, have the speech nearby in case you get really lost. Clarity is really important. Use words that are widely understood. Avoid words that you yourself struggle with. Now, when I was a teenager, I had real trouble saying the word statistics. I can say it now, but back then I couldn't do it, which was just something I couldn't get past. And we all have words that we struggle with. So don't use words that you can't say. Speak clearly, look up, and as I said, speak to the back of the room. And as I say, if you fail to prepare, then, well, you are going to fail. So practice, practice, practice. We all have video facilities on our phones. You can video yourself at home. You can time the talk to make sure that it doesn't overrun. You can be critical of what you're doing and you can identify weaknesses. And I think it's a good idea to ask friends to comment on your content. So for example, Maya, not that long ago, asked me if I would comment on her content, and I gave her some helpful comments to try and, give her some ideas about how she might vary it a bit. So ask someone to comment on your content. Don't ask your mum, because she's probably not going to be that honest about it, I'm afraid. And in terms of your timing, in any kind of talk, 10% is the opening, 10% is the finish, and 80% is the content. It's a little bit like an aeroplane flight. The exciting parts are the opening and the close. The middle bit's a bit dull. Now, what I do with an opening is I very often, as I did today, I explained what I'm going to be doing later on. I then do what I'm doing later on. And at the end, I very often will summarize by saying, right, so to summarize what I've done, here's what I've said, here's what I'm meaning, and here's what you should take away from it. And that just means if someone's been sleeping through my talk, at least they have still managed to go away with something to remember. Now, visuals are important. I don't know what talk you might be giving. It might be holiday slides. It might be a talk about conservation and an area you're working on. But a lot of people put lots of words on their slides, and this is bad. I've talked to people about this, and I say, why do you put all these words on your slides? And they say, well, it's my speaking notes. And I go, oh, I see. Well, so you really want your audience reading your speaking notes? Is that right? What would you like? People, you know, the audience have a choice. They can either listen to your talk or they can read all the words on your slide, but they're not going to do both. So if they're reading your slide, they're now not listening to you anymore, and you've lost the audience. So don't put lots of words on slides. Use simple words and actually try and use powerful images. And if there are numbers, so you're talking about the fact that there are, I don't know, 350 critically endangered species in the world, have a big 350 on the slide. It really, really hits home. So here's a slide that I hate. This is actually from a BirdLife International document. It's not actually a slide, but I could imagine somebody using this as a slide. It's showing 3 quite interesting birds that are threatened around the world with a whole load of words. So right now already, I bet half of you are trying to read that. You probably stopped listening to me straight away. Really, I want to talk about the Micronesian scrub fowl, the wandering albatross, and Gough bunting. So instead of doing that, why don't we do this? And straight away, it's much more interesting. It's eye-catching. The pictures are bigger. You can see the words. The only words on the screen are the ones I want you to remember, which are the species about which I'm talking. Instantly, it's a lot better. Now, if you're giving a talk on the day, for example, like the conference you did, David, I would go early. I'd make sure I got there in good time, particularly if you're not the only speaker. So if you're actually like one of 7 or 8 speakers, get there in good time. Get used to the setup, how the system works. It might be, you know, just understanding where the audience come in, where, you know, most people are sitting. I think it's really important to see other speakers present their talks, because some of them may agree with what you're going to say. Some of them might disagree. And it's actually really important that you're not the only person in the room that doesn't know that. So you want to be there so that when you get up and speak, you can say that you heard what they said, but respectfully, you see it slightly differently. And indeed, if you've heard somebody speaking beforehand and you agree with them, you can, of course, refer to what they've said. It's actually quite a good thing to do because it's good for them. It's good for you because it shows the audience that you're actually really plugged into all this. You're not just some person who's been hired to come and make a presentation. And I always mingle with the crowd at the coffee break because I would go up to people and I say, I'm the next speaker. What do you really want to hear about? And they'll quite often give me ideas, which I can also refer to when I get up and speak. Now, I've spoken at a number of conferences, as I mentioned, which have up to 2,000 people present. These are business conferences. And that kind of technique is really quite useful if you're actually wanting to convey to people, you are actually listening to the people. Particularly if you're able to say, you know, I've just been in the coffee break. I was chatting with David Lindo. You know, he was telling me among all the things I'm going to talk about today, he wants to hear more about urban birds. And it kind of just reminds people that, you know, you're not just a person who's been put there to speak. You actually are part of this group. You're taking part in the day. And of course, at the moment, we've got loads of these online forums during the COVID period. Now, who knows? These may go on for a year or so. I've just messaged every RSPB group in the country to tell them that I'm available if they're short of a speaker. And a whole load of them have come back to me straight away and said, yeah, we actually have decided to do Zoom talks. When can we have you? So that was a good move. I'm really happy to have helped them. So improving your style is actually important. So when you've done your first couple of talks, you'll start to get to feel what your style is like. If you've never watched them, watch TED Talks. TED.com is a whole database of some of the world's best speakers on every subject going. Greta Thunberg talking about climate change. It could be somebody talking about a particular bird they've discovered in South America, but there are loads of people who give these talks in front of a live audience. They're very short. They're about 10 or 15 minutes. And in 10 minutes, you can see how somebody tells an entire story from start to finish and has almost a standing ovation at the end. So watch those, see how those people vary, because everyone varies in the way they speak. And develop a speaking style that suits you. Make sure you're comfortable with it. I mean, at first you might not feel comfortable. So, for example, with Maya, I was doing a little bit of training with her, and I suggested a different way of speaking and a way of looking, which she might want to mention later. I probably found it quite hard at the time, but I've noticed she's taken it on board and she's doing it, and all I'm hearing is good things from other people. Modulating your voice is really important. So if I was saying, good evening, I'm here today to talk to you about media training. Speaking in public is very important, so I hope you enjoy it. Well, you've already left the room, if not physically, but mentally, you've gone. The better way to do it is to modulate your voice and say, good evening, and thank you so much for coming here tonight to hear me talk about how to speak in public. Already, you're back in the room with me. And also remember that silence is powerful. Quite a lot of people just literally fire machine gun style at you. I sometimes think putting a slide on the screen and not saying anything is hugely powerful. Get people to look at it and then say, wow, what a photograph. What that's showing is something I've always wanted to see, and already, there's much more drama in with it. Now, quite often, the things you might be invited to do is maybe take part in a panel discussion. We see a lot of these days. So I've done that a number of times. I actually quite often chair panel discussions. I think as a panelist, it's a good idea to read up on the other panelists, 3 or 4 of them or whatever there are, because, they may agree with you, they may be totally against you, but it may just really help you. It will always help you if you understand where they're coming from. What is their message? What is their background? It gives you an idea of what they might say on the day, and they might be on your side or against. I think be very clear about what you want to say if you're on a panelist. Again, I know Maya did it the other day, so I'd be interested to hear how she got on. If you've got 3 or 4 people, some of them may be pretty powerful, might be quite, like their own ideas and want everybody to hear them, and you can't get a word in, and the moderator maybe is to take every time there's a question goes to them. Nodding your head is really good. So when someone's asking, when someone like the moderator is saying, now let's talk about climate change, as long as it's something you do want to talk about, I mean, I would at this point nod my head really furiously so that the moderator will see that and automatically, subconsciously will think, Keith's wanting to talk about that. Keith, what do you think about climate change? That's just a technique I've used quite a bit. You can use that a lot on radio studios as well. Nobody can see it. Anyway, dealing with a tricky audience. Now, I'm always being asked this because, there's always a Mr. Grumpy in every audience. There are people who wish that they'd been asked to give the talk. Perhaps they've been studying a site. Maybe, David, there'd be somebody who'd been watching wormwood scrubs for 50 years, and they're in the audience, and you've been there and you've been doing it for 10 years, and yet you're the person on the stage. How do you deal with that? Because if you've got that kind of person in the audience, you're probably going to be aware of it and feel awkward. My technique is very simple. I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here talking to you today about wormwood scrubs. Fantastic place to go bird watching. And how great that we've got Joe Bloggs in the audience. He's been watching this place for 50 years. Great to have you here, Joe. So Joe initially would have been hacked off at not being invited to give the talk. He's now been given a nice little credit and acknowledgement from you. So he's now thinking, oh, that's pretty good. They mentioned my name. And if Joe was going to ask you a really shitty question later, catch you out and say, how many times has yellow-browed warbler been seen at wormwood scrubs? He's not going to do that now, because if he does, he's going to look like a complete bastard. So you will not get trouble from Joe anymore. Dealing with boredom. I've seen people in my talks, definitely using their phone, chatting with each other, I don't know, doing Sudoku, whatever it is. So at this point, and also if I've got people asleep in the audience, and a bit more about that later, I will think, right, okay, I'm losing this. So I'm now going to do a quick survey. So I'm going to say, right, quick survey in the room. How many people here have gone bird watching in Wormwood Scrubs? Hands up. And everybody has to kind of go back from wherever they were sleeping and thinking about to suddenly take part in my little mini survey. And I say, oh, that's interesting. About a quarter of you. Thank you so much for that. But you've kind of got them back. And that's just a technique for getting them back in. And don't get angry if challenged. I mean, I've had people challenge me, you know, trying to be clever. Don't get angry at all, because you'll start to lose it. And obviously, be confident. Remember, you know, the audience is there. They want you to be good. I always use the audience to support me. So I'll give you an example of something where I was chairing a conference. It was a company conference, and one of the suppliers or agents for the company had a total beef with the chairman of the company. And, you know, we went through a Q&A, and this person asked their question about the fact they hadn't been paid their commission and they'd been waiting 3 months. And the chairman gave an answer, and he said, well, look, you know, I'd love to see you at the end. I don't know why we haven't paid your commission, but we will see you. And this, you know, I said, right, next question, please. And this woman put her hand up again. I thought, oh, goodness me, she's not going to ask about this commission again, is she? And she did. She said, well, I still want to ask about why I haven't been paid commission. And I think I tried to sort of say to her, you know, that really the best way to get the answer is to speak to the chairman afterwards. But she wasn't having any of it. And I said, well, look, I'll tell you what, quick show of hands. Hands up, anybody here who wants to hear more from this lady about why she didn't get paid commission? Anybody? No? I'm sorry. I'd love to have heard about it, but nobody else seems to want to, so I'm sorry about that. A little bit Jimmy Carr, that, I'm afraid, but sometimes you just have to shut people down. And the audience absolutely laughed, and the woman didn't say any more. Bit painful for her, but, you know, sometimes you've got to do that. Dealing with nerves, as I said, if you are not prepared, then you're going to feel nervous. So, you know, be well prepared and get sleep. You know, don't go out on a bit of a boozy night the night before. Get plenty of sleep. I always say to people, if you're nervous, even then, imagine the applause from the audience at the end of your talk. It's a great feeling, isn't it, when you've just given a talk and you've got 30 seconds of applause, people smiling, looking happy. Imagine that, because that's what's going to happen. And all of us, our voices go up. You know, it's just a natural thing. The body reacts to being under pressure by your voice going higher. And if your voice is already quite high, you can sound like you're squeaking a little bit. So to avoid that, what I do is I sing the scales. So I don't have a very good singing voice, but I go, you know, really down, low, down, and I try and go down and down and down as low as I can, and I just do those noises quietly to the side of the stage. And what that does is it exercises your vocal cords at the bottom end. So when you then go out onto the stage, even though you're feeling nervous still, won't stop you from feeling nervous, your voice naturally now will be deeper than it was if you hadn't done that. So don't rush what you're going to do. Give yourself plenty of time, pace yourself, have a glass of water, and smile. Smiling's really important. If you're looking like you're fed up and not enjoying it, then people will detect that. Whereas if you're speaking there and you're saying, I'm really delighted to be here to talk to you about media training today, such an exciting subject, smile, 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 people will pick up on that. I mean, don't get cheesy with it, but, you know, just try and bring it in if you can. Smile more. Quick word about TV and radio interviews. I've done a lot, as you said, David. I've done over 1,000 TV broadcasts and about 5,000 radio programs. So on TV, 7% of what is absorbed by the viewers is actually words. So what you say is only worth about 7% of what they're listening at. 38% of it is the voice and tone, so how you sound, and 55% is the non-verbal stuff. So basically how you look. So if you look good, it's actually way, way more important than what you say. I mean, obviously you can't talk rubbish, but worry about looking good and sounding good, and the rest of it should take care of it. Obviously the non-verbal bit doesn't work on radio. Have 3 things to say, which I mentioned, and learn a technique also, which is called bridging. So this is, let's imagine I was doing an interview with David, and I was talking about the birds of Wormwood Scrubs, and I want to talk about an outing that's coming up at Wormwood Scrubs next week. But you know, and I talk about, you know, lots of birds, including the robin, and David maybe interrupts and go, oh, robin, I love the robin. How many birds in the world have red breasts, Keith? I don't want to be talking about that because most of them don't occur anywhere near wormwood scrubs. So I'll say, well, you know what, an awful lot of them, David, but you know what, the robin is the one we have here. And, you know, wormwood scrubs next week, we have an outing. So this is called bridging. Acknowledge, bridge, and change. Acknowledge the question, don't just ignore it. Bridge, basically find a way of getting it back. Yep, the robin has got a red breast and we've got it here. Change, talk about wormwood scrubs. So that's called bridging, ABC. You probably won't ever have to do it, but it's something which I train a lot of people to do, because a lot of interviewers, they just want to get you off on a different subject that's of interest to them. Well, that's not on. You're there to talk about your thing. So what's it like? You have various kinds of interviews. Soundbite. Now, a soundbite is where somebody stands like this, back in the days before COVID, with a microphone, and they're just wanting about 20 seconds off you. Which is, you know, they'd say a question like, so tell me about wormwood scrubs. What's it like for bird watching? So they just want 20-second answer, which you will give, and you won't give more than 20 seconds, because if it's more than 20 seconds, they've got to chop it up, so they won't use it. So 20 seconds is your time. In fact, 15 is good too. Don't overrun on that. They just want a nice clip they can put in a news bulletin. So that's called a sound bite, and they might ask you it several times in the hope you might phrase it slightly differently. Then we've got something which we call down the line. So down the line doesn't have to be TV, it could be radio. You're actually here in a TV studio with a backcloth, and they're going to put you into a live bulletin, or they might pre-record it as if it were a live interview and then slot it in later. So that's a little bit unnerving. You're not looking at a person, you're looking at a camera, and you've got an earpiece in. But, you know, that's sometimes how you have to do it, because you can't always be where they are. And then you've got the full Monty, which I have to say I absolutely love. The TV studio, which is really glitzy, it's bright. Quite often it looks like it's falling apart. A lot of it's made of cardboard and balsa wood. And it looks as though it's really smart, but actually it's just held together with gaffer tape. And here you are, you're in a live studio, you're going live in front of maybe 1 million or 2 million people. Cameras all over the place. Quite often cameras are controlled by computers, so they will be moving independently. There won't be a person standing behind them. They'll literally be like Daleks moving around you, quite off-putting. You're probably going to get 3 or 4 minutes to do that. Not long. It's really over very quickly, which is why those 3 things you want to say is really important. So prepare for whatever the questions are likely to be if you're going to be interviewed. What are the weaknesses in your subject? What is your nightmare question? And do you have the data in a simple format so you can respond quickly when someone says to you, David, how many times has yellow-browed warbler been at wormwood scrubs? So, you know, you just got to be prepared for all those kind of weirdo questions. I'm just going to touch on writing. A lot of people I know want to write for magazines. I write for quite a few magazines, both Birdwatch and Birdwatching. I've got something coming up in British Birds very soon. I've got a commission from BBC Wildlife as well. So really understand the paper that you're approaching if you're going to them, and you know, read it so you know what you're looking at and the kind of article they might be after. Have your ideas ready to pitch to the editor. Editors love having ideas pitched to them. Be available, be flexible. Most of the people who I write for quite often come to me and say, I've got a hole in the magazine, I need 1,000 words by tomorrow, could you turn it around? And if you are able to turn around 1,000 words, which is not that difficult to do, then they will love that and they'll use you again and again and again. So, and be flexible. So that's the real secret. I once did a piece in my lunchtime break for the Daily Telegraph. I had to do 500 words on why bird watching was great. And I actually was at a lunch and I did it in the taxi going back, and I dictated it to the copy desk, and they paid me £500 for 500 words. It's amazing. But that was the old days. That doesn't happen these days. Now the money's gone. Vlogs. Now vlogs are big these days. There are lots of people doing them. Maya does a vlog. There's her Twitter address. Kabir Kaul does them as well. I think Maya and Kabir are the 2 stars at the moment of the vlog scene for birders. And, you know, standing there looking at the camera, talking about wherever they are at. It's going to be interesting to see if Maya and Kabir develop into actually interviewing people as well, because just turning up and looking at your phone and talking is one skill. Actually when you're interviewing someone else, that brings in a whole new level of skills, which you need if you want to get into TV. So vlog techniques, all I was really going to say there is know what you're wanting to say. Really be clear about that before you're standing in front of that phone. Try not to deviate. Look at the camera. I saw Kabir the other day did something for the BBC where he was looking off camera and it looked awful. He admitted it himself. Look at the camera because that's what vlogs are all about. And modulate your voice. Don't just, have this deadpan voice. Try and modulate your voice and smile because you're supposed to be enjoying yourself. If you're not looking like you're enjoying it, why should anybody else? And I think the key thing for me, David, is that remember, the audience are on your side. People want you to do well. They want to hear you. People who attended this talk today wanted me to do well. They didn't want me to give a rubbish talk that nobody enjoyed. So just remember that. That's quite key. That's my Twitter address. Again, if you want to find me, I'm very happy to answer any questions that people may have. Over to you, David.
That was absolutely so informative. I could actually listen to that. Can you hear me? Good. Good. I just wondered, my mic was working for a sec. I can listen to all that stuff all day long. I find it fascinating. And, talking about elements of what, reading about or hearing about what you've said reminded me of some of the things that I had to overcome. For example, the first time I ever went on television was not what most people think. And, that was Springwatch 14 years ago. In fact, I went on TV when I was a sprightly 17-year-old, and it was a music program called The Tube.
Oh, yeah.
Paula Yates and I can't remember who else was the presenter on it, but it was the late Paula Yates. And before going on, it was all about the music scene at the time, soul music. And at the time I was thinking, yeah, I'm going to go there. I'm going to talk about this and talk about that. And when I got there, me and two of my mates were lined up and the camera came to me and Paula Yates asked me a question, stuck the mic in front of my face, and I just froze. I like a rabbit in headlights. And then she went swiftly on to the next person who then spoke. And I thought to myself, what happened then? And it's so easy to get yourself into that situation.
I bet you never let that happen again, did you?
Oh, it never happened again, ever.
Absolutely.
But then I didn't realise I was going to be doing it again after that anyway. But obviously, the next time I did do it, in my mind somewhere, made me think, well, I've got to be prepared for this. Do you want to share your screen, by the way, so we can see your lovely face?
Oh, yeah. Hang on, stop share. Let's get back to that.
Let's see. Now, Zoomers as well, please, at this point, if you've got questions, ask away. But anyway, sorry, you were saying, Keith.
No, I was just going to give you my nightmare. I was actually I used to do a piece on Sky TV every week. And I actually had lost concentration. You sometimes do become quite relaxed. I was in the studio, I'd been there 5 minutes or so. And I actually realized I hadn't listened to the question I'd been asked. It was actually with Selena Scott. It was not the, cheeriest of people. And I actually hadn't got a clue what she'd asked me because I'd just been, I'd been watching the camera moving around, I think, like a Dalek. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm on live on national TV, international TV, and I actually can't, I can't actually now answer the question. So I said, you know what, Selena, it's an interesting question. What exactly, though, do you mean? And thankfully, she didn't come back and say, well, exactly what I said, because that would have stuffed me. But I did manage to get through that. So we've got a couple of questions coming.
Yeah, Sue Cresswell. That's actually Susan Warlow first. Do you want to come on?
Camera shy.
Okay, because Susan was saying that she speaks quietly, which she didn't realize herself. Is there any way of training yourself to speak louder?
Yeah, absolutely. So the little sort of mouse type voice where you get smaller and smaller, because what you do is you're thinking, I want to just crawl away, I want to be smaller, I want to be able to hide. How do you get around that? I'm not sure I know how to. You can either do it or you can't. I would actually you just have to throw yourself. It's like becoming an actor. You've just got to come on and say, well, hello and welcome to the Lee Valley Regional Park for this amazing talk now I'm going to give. wormwood scrubs. I mean, you know, just speak up, get a microphone. If you're somebody who can't project your voice well, um, get a microphone, makes it easier. But just learn to project. I mean, when I talk, I don't hear and on radio or whatever, I don't talk the way I would talk to a friend. So David, if you and I were talking, I'd say, you know, so have you seen any birds down at Wormwood Scrubs lately? You know, but if I was talking to you on TV, I'd say, so David, Wormwood Scrubs, have you seen any birds there lately? And if I talk to you like that in normal life, you'd think I, you know, need to go and see a doctor, because it's just way over the top. You know, you just have to up the game. That makes sense.
Okay, good. I was going to say that when I first got on TV, I did the One Show, and the commissioning editor said to me at the time, he said, "You've got no experience, but I think there's something about you. I think you could do this." And I remember, you know, going on set. I think we're doing something on parakeets, and because I was so used to seeing the finished product, you see people speaking seamlessly, and then a piece comes in with a bird or whatever, and then it comes back to them and they're talking. This is all pre-recorded. I thought that I had to get it right the first time around, and I found myself feeling very despondent when I was getting the lines wrong. I wasn't feeling confident with myself, and it made me realize that in actual fact, in those sort of circumstances, you have to act almost on the very edge of your personality, which is what you're saying about projection for Susan, because you may not naturally feel that you can talk in a loud voice and what have you, but you have to kind of push yourself to a degree that is still within your personality. You may not necessarily use that area of your personality, but it's still within your personality. To get yourself, you know, to be projecting out to people. So it's quite an interesting concept, really.
It totally is, and I think, you know, some of the best presenters you see and actors you see in real life are actually really quite quiet. I mean, you and I have both had the pleasure and luxury to talk to David Attenborough on and off over the years, and got to know him quite well. And David is just a quiet, gentle man who's a little bit shy, actually, isn't he? And he stands at the side of the stage before he goes on. But then when he goes up onto the stage, he's not larger than life, but he just owns the place. And that is the secret.
Yeah, I learned so much from David Attenborough watching him, actually, because I saw him live once, and as you say, he stood by the side of the stage before he was announced, and he looked almost like an old man just standing there. Yeah. The moment he came on, boom, he became this really animated person, not, as you say, not being extra animated, but just basically speaking with confidence and telling stories. And that's the thing that captivated me, the stories, actually relating it to the audience that made you want to listen to more.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally.
David Howden has a question. David, do you want to come? I know you're not shy, David.
Well, I pretend I'm not. Yeah, hello. Really interesting talk. Really interesting things to think about. My thought was doing a lot of these sort of presentations recently. I've done one or two where I've been presenting essentially to a computer screen in my room and the blank wall in front of me. And I found that very hard because I didn't get any sense of, when you're talking to people, you can vaguely get a sense of, are they bored? Are they excited? Did they find that amusing? Did they not? Do you have any tips on how you cope with this sort of almost talking to yourself, but having to still be performing to an audience that we have to deal with these days?
Yeah, that's a very good point, David. I think, yeah, sometimes you do find that I mean, I have cracked a couple of jokes on recent talks, and normally I would expect people to be laughing, and nobody laughed because, of course, they've all been muted. I felt almost like my joke had fallen flat, although the reality is that everybody heard it and was laughing in their own homes. Yeah, it's a new way of dealing with things. Although I believe Zoom will continue for business meetings, I think nature clubs and things like that will try and get back to the normal again, because it's the social side of it, which makes, you know, meeting up and talking about birds and wildlife so good. In terms of how you get over the fact that you can't see anybody, Well, maybe what you should do is line up your screen so you can see all the people sitting there. So I can see all of you now, actually. I've got a whole line of people. I can see who's listening, can see who's not looking at the screen right now. Yeah. So I think that's maybe part of the answer. Does that help you?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Just a passing observation. The London Natural History Society, which I'm involved with, we've been doing a lot on Zoom. We think we probably will continue it, probably in addition to in-person meetings. But we're getting quite a few people saying how happy they are that they're able to get to things when they can't get out the house. So it's an interesting challenge for the future.
I think that's a good point. So I used to be very involved in the London Natural History Society, as did David. And, you know, I'm sure they will have many more people coming because London's a big place. It's 25 miles across and each side. So, yeah.
I find it interesting doing these Zoom scenarios in terms of presentations. For example, I did one for Bird Fair, and it was strange because, I mean, I did it as part of the In Conservation With thing, but even I've done others since where I've just been talking to myself, doing a presentation. And it is a bit kind of weird when you are used to seeing an audience and you're used to seeing reactions, you're used to having people sort of laugh or what have you. And as you say, you both say, you know, you crack a gag and you almost expect to hear some kind of reaction and there's nothing. And yeah, I think it's another way. You have to get used to this whole new way. You just have to say, you know what, you know, hopefully that's worked. I'll just carry on and try and pretend that there's an audience in front of me, even though I can't see them.
Yeah, I think it helps if you've done quite a lot of radio. I used to do a monthly radio show on Radio 4 called Moneybox Live, and I'm used to therefore not seeing anybody and just talking. So that maybe is what helps me.
Yeah. Sue Cresswell, do you want to come on at all? Hello, Sue.
Bad microphone.
Okay, because I can't see Sue at all. I can only see this in speaker view, so I only can see Keith's lovely face. Okay, she's saying that she sees people getting more used to the digital Zoom world, but any specific thoughts on this medium?
Well, a bit like I said earlier, I think, you know, it does open up the opportunity to have people who you would never have. So if you wanted to have someone like Roy Dennis from Scotland talking about his work on ospreys and white-tailed eagles. I mean, he lives in Scotland, he's 80 now. He wouldn't want to be coming down to a meeting anywhere else like Bird Fair or London, but he would probably be very happy to do it via Zoom. So I think it would enable you to get many more speakers. I suspect what we're going to find is there will be, probably we'll go back to what we used to do, but there will be occasional special Zoom conferences where lots of people can take part. I think it's going to certainly revolutionize getting together. I don't want to have to go into any more committee meetings.
Fair enough. Jim Wright, I know that you're not shy, Jim. Do you want to come on and ask your question?
Yes, thanks. I notice David is quite flamboyant with his hand gestures in his presentations, whereas you seem to be a little, not quite so theatrical, shall I say. I just wonder if you've got any comment to make about using hand gestures in presentations.
Yeah, so probably David does use his hands more than me. That might be for me because I'm aware that it does feel to me as though my screen is quite narrow. I'm trying to keep my head in the picture. And so any gesticulations I do, nobody will see. Whereas I think on David's case, he's got the camera a little bit further back. And yeah, you can see it really well. Definitely on stage, I use hand gestures a lot. I don't walk around the stage a lot. Because that just annoys people, but I do if I want to create an effect. So yeah, on an actual stage, I'm much more theatrical than this.
Thank you. Could I ask another question, David? I wondered, Keith, do you work with politicians, and have you ever been tempted as a communicator to enter the world of politics yourself? I'd like to ask that question to David as well.
What's the question? I didn't quite hear the question, Ashley. Sorry.
Do we want to get into politics?
I wanted to know if Keith worked with politicians to help their presentations, and if he might at some stage be interested in becoming a politician. And I wanted to ask David the same question, if he's tempted at all by politics.
Okay, so I have trained up a few MPs, and I have certainly talked to government ministers before putting them on stage at conferences. I was headhunted to be Director of Communications for the Conservative Party. I actually decided I didn't want the job, and the guy who got it you may have heard of. He's called Dominic Cummings. Yeah, I didn't get into politics, and I don't think I want to because I don't like politicians very much.
Very good. What about David?
Well, I stood next to this man once. For those who don't know, that is the British Prime Minister, and I gave a talk with him, actually, funny enough. For me, I'm not really, I don't believe in the bullshit, to be honest. I think, it's all about being a bit more kind of open and honest, and I wouldn't want to fit into that world where I had to sort of toe a line and to not totally say what I believe in. So I don't think I would ever get involved in that either, to be honest. But I never knew about Keith, though. I mean, wow, that's quite an ask you had there.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. I don't vote for them now. I did then.
Yeah. Dennis Reardon says our local Audubon chapter will be having a former colleague doing a presentation about Australia after the bushfires from my home in Melbourne. What's happening about that, Dennis? I don't understand. Is that a question or a statement? Probably a statement, isn't it?
The statement.
Yeah.
Agreeing that you can have presenters from out of the area much more easily.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Dennis. I've just been talking to the American Birding Association to be doing a few things for them on their vlogs. So yeah, you can bring a lot of people in from around the world.
Yeah.
You can also reach a wider audience as you are, David. I mean, if you were having this conversation in London, it'd be Londoners there and nobody else.
Exactly.
Certainly not me from Connecticut.
Exactly. By the way, if anyone actually does do a lot of speaking in the Zoom audience, it'd be really interesting to see, for you to come on and talk about how you prepare. And also I want to have Maya come on and talk about that too. But just going back to what you were saying earlier, Keith, about preparation, it's interesting because when I started speaking, for my job as a, marketing person, I used to have to rehearse the stages of the presentation. And over a period of time, you realize that your presentation actually takes the same form. It's just about different bits of information that are hung on each level. And I kind of found that's happened in my speaking life now, because unlike a lot of people, I never write a script, never. Sometimes I write notes, occasionally I write notes, especially if I'm talking about something which I haven't spoken about before. But I write a couple of notes in the presenter's view, or in the presenter's notes. But I never actually do that, because I actually kind of almost get off on the idea that if I just get out there and talk, then you can be more kind of adaptive, or you can adapt more to sort of how the feeling is in the audience.
I agree, and
I've found that quite a lot, because I give talks, and I mean, for example, I gave a talk once on a ship in Antarctic, a ship going into Antarctic, and everyone was. I was part of the crew. I was basically leading the tour on birding, but there was other people there doing various aspects to do with oceanography and all that sort of stuff. So they were all giving talks on that subject, and it was a case where every evening someone gave a 15-minute talk on their subject, and they asked me, "What would you like to talk about, David?" And they expected me to say urban birds, and I said the first thing that came into my mind, which was, "Does Yeti exist?"
Mm-hmm.
To which I had raised eyebrows and laughter. But I knew by saying that I'd get an audience, because there'd be people curious. So that night, the place was rammed. I had nothing in terms of research, because obviously, well, A, I had no internet, and B, I didn't really have any notes, but I did have an idea in my head, which was, as with all the talks I try and do, and I think it's echoed in what you've said in your presentation, I try to have a sort of a beginning, middle, and end. You know, you start off with a premise, the middle bit's the actual body of the whole thing to back up your premise, and then the last bit is, right, what do you think? So that's what I did. And it was, for me, exhilarating because it's thinking on your feet, it's using all the stuff that you learned before, but applying it to a very different subject, but basically doing it the same way as you would do if you were talking about a subject you knew. And I found that really fascinating. And I every now and again, I love sort of stepping out of the sphere and trying something, you know, completely dangerous. Like, for example, I gave a talk in Kingston where I spoke to 900 people. I was part of a roster of 3 speakers speaking about nature. And before me was a guy called George McGavin, who's a real big insect guy, does a lot of stuff on TV. And he came on and he did a 20-minute talk, very polished, beautiful presentation, all the gags lined up, absolutely fantastic. And I sat there with nothing in my head, nothing, deliberately, because I wanted to go up there with not even a presentation. I wanted to just see if I can actually stand in front of an audience and talk.
Yeah.
So my time came and I stood in front of the audience and it just came and I spoke and I had this idea which I ran through and it worked. So I think that's a dangerous way of doing it, but for me, I find it really exhilarating to actually sometimes get yourself into that situation and say, right, I'm going to really try and see if I can make this work.
Yeah, I think I would be up for that, talking about the Yeti, but I would want to have, I would probably need 5 minutes to just go online, have a quick look at something about the Yeti. I'm very lucky I can memorize huge amounts of information, so I don't have to write it down. I can just then walk out and use what the information was. I can remember it for about 30 minutes, but after that I won't remember it the next day. So yeah, but you know, most people don't get to exercise that skill or learn that they've even got it because they just are going to give one talk, maybe 2 or 3, and they probably won't get to that stage of being able to wing it. I saw Chris had a question, didn't he? A bit earlier. He said he wanted to ask a question.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Keith. Good presentation. I have to present finance report to a board of trustees once a month, once every 2 months, etc. And follows on a little bit from what David was saying about when he was in marketing, like the sort of format of the reports, pretty much the same, like each month, each presentation. What I do beforehand is I send out a pack of information, accounts, and like a commentary. But what I find is that when I actually come to, like at the minute, like Zoom meeting, I'm actually almost just, because the commentary is quite detailed, I almost feel like it's a bit boring and I don't really have much else to say. And I don't know whether I should condense down the commentary. So I want like people to be like, when the trustees come to the meeting, to be prepared and know what I'm going to talk about. But I almost feel like at the meeting, it's almost a bit of a waste of time me actually verbalising what's in the reports.
Right. Well, it sounds to me as though maybe what you need to do is focus on a different part of the trustees, the treasurer's role each time. So maybe if you've got to do this every month, I would pick up on 1 month on a particular aspect of the work you're doing, talk about it, and then summarize all the other stuff very quickly. And then over a year, you've brought in something new and original each time you speak, while still providing the information which is important for the trustees in order to know whether the charity is doing okay. So, you know, you might, one particular meeting, you might talk about operating expenses to do with conservation reserves or whatever, I don't know. You know what I mean? Pick a topic, and unless there's something really important to bring out, I would just rapidly go through the rest, because frankly, no disrespect, the treasurer's report is probably the one piece that everybody wants to get past quickly.
Yeah, I almost feel like you get like kind of like rushed through, but then sometimes the most important bits from what I've got to say about like the future and the forecasting part, I almost feel like I'm being rushed through that.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, actually, that's the bit I really want to talk about.
Right.
So,
Well, okay, so I get to chair, Chris Packham and I get to chair the, or jointly chair the Hampshire Ornithological Society AGM, and we do it in about 20 minutes, which includes the Secretary's report, the Chairman's report, and the Treasurer's report. And
right,
everybody is delighted when we've done it, as long as the figures are adding up and you can see some simple graphics on the screen that show you're actually in profit, or if you're not in profit, here's why we're not in profit. Yeah, any extra time spent on the Treasurer's report is probably time not well spent.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds like probably actually need to condense down, I think, my report, and also probably like the theatre manager's report, etc. And, you know, sort of get on to, you know, talking about, you know, the sort of salient points that are at pan going forward.
Yeah, well, maybe what you could do is if you've got to do it 12 times during a year, find 12 things within what you normally report that you could make as little tiny topics and just talk about those, each one of those for about 2 or 3 minutes each time you present. And it gives them something new to listen to. And over an entire year, you will have told them everything about what they need to know.
That's great. No, thank you. That's good food for thought. Really appreciate it.
Let us know how it works out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, too. I don't know what you Zoomers think, but listening to Keith's voice, I find it very relaxing. You've got a very calming voice, Keith. I bet you've been told that a lot of people. But
I remember when I gave a talk you organised for me to give to the London Natural History Society. Unfortunately, there was a slight problem with the promotion, and only 15 people turned up, and 3 of them were asleep, which equaled 15% of the audience. So I think I do have a calming voice. And obviously, if you've got a hard day at the office, quite nice to listen to.
I agree. Now, listen, you've seen a lot of birds in your life. Which is your favourite, and have you even seen your favourite bird?
I think the bird, well, let's put it this way. If somebody told me that I hadn't got very long to live, but I had got long enough to live to go on one trip, then the trip I would do would be the one to go and see the emperor penguin, because it's the only penguin species I haven't seen. And it's the most expensive one to go and see as well, and the most difficult in some respects. So emperor penguin, I think, probably would be my favorite bird of the ones I haven't seen. And of the ones I have seen, the Araripe manakin. So look it up when you finish this. It's a beautiful white bird with a red cap, the Araripe manakin. And it's a bird that Chris Packham hasn't seen. So I usually, whenever I see Chris, which is once a year or so, I just sort of remind him of that and say, "It's a lovely bird, that, Chris. Have you seen it yet?" Yeah.
Good one. And if you could be anywhere on this planet, notwithstanding the current scenario, doesn't seem to be many places you haven't been to, but where would you want to be right now if you could be somewhere?
Well, right now, December, I would like to be doing a trip to Honduras and Guatemala, driving from one to the other, and probably having a different guide in Honduras and a different guide in Guatemala, and seeing something like 50 or so species of birds in Central America that I haven't seen before. It'd be a nice time to be there as well. Good climate, lots of warblers from America down there.
Fabulous choices. Zoomers, just to let you know that there's some more people coming up this week. We've got a full roster. Obviously, we've had Keith tonight. Tomorrow, a guy called Amir Balaban, who's from Israel, and he'll be talking about the art and urban nature in Israel. We're sticking with the art subject on Wednesday the 9th with Pascalis Dugalis, who is an artist living in Germany. He makes amazing art, and he'll be talking and also, hopefully painting live for us as well. On Thursday the 10th, we have Heather Wolf from the USA, and she'll be talking about birding in Brooklyn Bridge Park, New York. I've met her. She's a real urban birder. It's going to be a great talk. So that's this week. It's looking full already, guys. So it's going to be a good week. And it started excellently tonight. I'd like to thank you, Keith. I mean, we could keep talking. In fact, we are going to keep talking after this for 10 minutes. But right now, I'd like to thank you for very enlightening, that's a word I can't pronounce properly, enlightening hour talking about public speaking and all the art to it. And hope the Zoomers enjoyed it too.
Thank you, David.